Okay, hi, and welcome to What's the Gouge? This is our brand new channel. We're going to give this a go, and the you might be wondering how we came up with the name. Well, first of all, we want to focus on financial issues. We're going to have discussions about financial issues that affect everybody, but we mostly focus on veterans and active duty military. I spent 30 years in the Marine Corps and retired, and we started our business after that. And so we want to focus on financial issues. You're wondering, if you were not military, you probably, what the gouge, what does that mean? Military folks are probably familiar with the term, but gouge could seem derogatory if you're not familiar with it. But in the military, it's really a naval term that came about, but the gouge turned from negative into a more positive term that basically Gouge had become the essential information that you need in order to succeed in the military. So, in the military, we like to share information, and we typically say, "I got some good gouge for you." So that's sort of we came up with that idea that we can relay, financial issues and have a little bit of a military veteran skew on it, but also, wide enough that it will appeal to a broader audience. So, anyway, I'm Joe, and we started our business, father-son generational business, after I retired. And you see beside me Spencer, my son, and I'll kick it over to him. He can introduce himself and clean up some of the stuff that I just probably messed up with. So over to you, Spencer.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, I'm Spencer Turkle. I'm the co-founder of Sierra Hotel Financial, our registered investment advisor, where we serve mainly active duty and veteran military members, government contractors, federal employees. But really, we can serve anyone. The financial planning comes down to a lot of the same stuff across any industry. But really, I think we're just kind of keyed into the culture and expectations of those particular ones. So that's what we speak to a lot. I've been a financial advisor for a few years here. When my father was transitioning out of the military, I was really excited to hear that he wanted to join me and start our own practice together. And we started that with the sole mission to serve people, starting with the active duty and military, but really just serve people in general. And we provide advice. We don't sell things. We don't sell insurance. We don't sell mutual funds. We just provide advice to people. And that's really the goal of this YouTube channel, is just to further that and provide advice to people who need it. Because what we're going to discuss today is the financial industry as a whole, the history of financial planning, and I think that'll maybe clear up some of the experiences people have had with the industry, because it is really a unique industry compared to others like the accounting industry or the law industry. So I think the unique history of it and really the unique timelines of it will help give people more insight into what the industry is really about. So, Father, where should we start for today? Let's turn
Yeah,
this into
so
a conversation.
right. So good starting point here is it after I transitioned out of the military and Spencer pulled me into this world of financial planning. It was really interesting because he's somewhat became somewhat of a financial industry historian himself, digging into the history quite a bit. So it really helped me out a lot knowing the history of financial planning and investing in the United States. So, Spencer, I thought we'd start with that and just have a free flowing conversation. And maybe I know that we've split it up sort of into three different historical periods. So hang with us, guys. But it should be interesting. The first period really is kind of from 1759, if you can believe it, through all the way through 1969. The industry was evolving at that time, but pretty slowly. So go ahead and give us your summary on that, Spencer.
Yeah, I think it's funny. So the first period is 1759 to December of 1969, which I think it's funny that you outlive the industry, Father. You are older than the industry itself, which I think, at least when we would define it starting. And so I think that's kind of a fun perspective, because most things like law and accounting have been around for, I don't know, hundreds of years. And so the financial planning industry really is just a new concept all within itself. So from 1759 to December of 1969, all that financial planning really could be or could consist of at that point was working at your company for your entire career, getting your pension, and then living on your pension. And then also, folks would usually buy life insurance in case they passed away and they didn't get their pension, right, for their families mainly, so to not leave their families astray. So there really wasn't what we consider as modern financial planning up until December of 1969. So hundreds of years of just really, again, people just working at the same company and then retiring, getting their pension, and living on that pension. And this is a period too where folks just didn't really have a ton of discretionary income anyway. So you can kind of see why there wasn't financial planning. In 1924, this is when the first mutual fund came around. So some of the upper class in the roaring 20s would start buying securities like mutual funds, and maybe some of the upper middle class as well. But that got largely discouraged by the Great Depression in the late 20s, 29 there. When the market dropped and everyone saw all of their savings drop wildly in the Great Depression, kind of slowed people from investing for the next few decades, right? So that first period going up till 1969, phase one, or section one of the history, really just wasn't, there just wasn't financial planning, right? 1969, there was it was a former vacuum salesman and an insurance agent got together, I think in Colorado,
Yeah.
and said, maybe we should start doing some planning. New things were coming around. People had means to save. Um, the 50s and 60s were great for people. People started having discretionary income. We didn't see quite the shifts that we see today yet with pensions going away and 401ks coming up, but there was starting to be some shifts in what people had access to. And so these two guys got together. They gathered presumably the only 13 other people that were even interested in financial planning. It was mostly either mutual fund salesmen or insurance salesmen that wanted to do more than just sell the products to people. They got together and they started the International Association for Financial Planning, which has evolved and turned into other organizations over the years. And that really is what we would consider to be the birth of financial planning in the late 1969, right?
Right. I guess I can add a little bit of context to that as a good rundown from that first period and then sort of transitioning to the next period, which really was the birth of financial planning itself. But, if you think about, you talked about the Great Depression, and then we went through World War II. After World War II, obviously Americans started to benefit after World War II, and industrialization really picked up, and the middle class really grew. So, how else are you going to invest and pass things to your children other than really just purchasing a home, so passing that home along, and with more and more discretionary income became, investing started to become more retail, I'm sure. And then, like you described in 69, there were guys like, we'd really like to do the right thing for people and help them to plan rather than just go out and try to sell products. So that's a pretty big evolution. I mean, maybe talk through that evolution a little bit more and your perspective on it, Spencer, going forward from 69.
Yeah, so forward from 69 starts sort of phase two or our second part of the history. So the first part was the 1700s all the way up to 1969. There just wasn't really any financial planning. 69, late 69 was the birth of the financial planning. And the next period we defined as December of 1969, so call it 1970 if you want. But December of 1969 all the way up to 1999, so right before the turn of the century. And these are bookended by two big events. So we already talked about the birth of financial planning in 1969. 1999 was a big event for the industry. That is when the Merrill Lynch rule came about. So Merrill Lynch lobbied the government to allow their brokers, so their brokers were just people that sold mutual funds, to allow their brokers to start offering what's called fee-based accounts. So instead of just charging commissions on sales, they could start charging people's fees and they could start calling themselves financial advisors. So most people just kind of shorthand refer to this as the Merrill Lynch rule of allowing brokers to basically call themselves financial advisors. And that's an important distinction because we're going to talk about it later, but the financial advisor term just gets real messy today. And so that's why we kind of bookend these things. So, all from 1969 to 1999, the industry was growing. It was still super infancy. It really wasn't something that anybody but the ultra high net worth were using at that point in the 80s and 90s. And then 1999, when Merrill Lynch got that Merrill Lynch rule put into place, and brokers could start charging ongoing fees instead of just commissions and start calling themselves financial advisors, that was a major turning point in the industry as well. And I mean, Father, you were alive in this period. I was not really, or not sentient. And so, could you, I mean, talk us through your upbringing? I know you were young for a lot of this, but did you even hear much about financial advisors growing up? Was it a thing? Did people do financial planning? What was it even like from
Y-
69 in your lifetime of 69 to 1999?
Yeah, so coincidentally, 69 happens to be the year I was born. I mean, if I have no other claim to fame, I always say I was on this earth before we made it to the moon. So just barely. But so I do start to recall that period in the early 70s when I started realizing, obviously, I had no perspective then, but I lived through the 70s and it was rough. I mean, we were lower middle class. So at our level, investing was not even a thing. It still was, from my perspective, the same as what you just described. I mean, for example, my father fought in World War II and then he had a job with an airline his whole career. And he didn't, and we had 8 children. So we weren't not invested. There was no word about investing. It was really just like you said, work your job for 30 years. And he still rated a pension after that. So 70s, 80s pensions were still around. But as you know, I think probably in the 80s, when Ronald Reagan came around, small businesses started to take off. I think people, the middle class started expanding, more money in people's pockets. Even like skilled labor, people had extra money, and a lot of people were starting businesses. So that's where I think that the guys, the vacuum sales people that started that initiative in the 70s really started probably seeing where financial planning was coming into its own in the 80s, and they were gaining ground. People having more money, it's like, okay, what more can I do now? I have a home, I'm paying on a mortgage. Um, Companies are not offering pensions as much anymore, or they're not as good a deal. What else can I do? So I think probably the first time I started hearing about investments was probably in the late 80s or early 90s. And by that time I was college age and then entered into the Marine Corps. But still not that big of a thing. And I really did not know that there were even financial advisors until later into the 2000s. So I think my experience was, similar to the previous period where like investment seemed untouchable, and those people that had a lot of money were using broker dealers. And I knew of the term broker dealer, but it was not something that I had access to or needed access to just because I didn't have it just was not well known. And the getting that stuff out and investments out to the retail people and middle class, I mean, at least in my experience, wasn't a thing. But by the time we hit mid 90s, a lot of people were, in my experience, a lot of people were talking about investments all the time, whether it be just, and mostly what I heard was individual, stocks, bonds. You started hearing about, because I think we'll have discussion about the fact that, when you're trying to make predictions as an individual in the market, it's similar to going and sitting down at a table at Vegas. Some people win big, very few. Other people, make moderate gains, and a lot of people lose as well. So I think the experience in that period up through 1999 was still pretty moderate as far as financial advisors. And my experience aligns exactly with what you said. That Merrill Lynch decision probably was pretty big because that's at the point at which I started noticing that a lot of people were calling themselves financial advisor and approaching people, just regular middle class people to see if they needed the services of a financial advisor. So that was kind of sort of my experience in that time frame.
Okay, so financial planning was born in the same year as you, 69, but it didn't actually go out and get its first job until probably it was an adult in the 90s or maybe even 2000s is what it
Yeah,
sounds like. So,
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
yeah, so we can talk about the industry being, over 50 years old, but really in my mind when I think about it, I see it as maybe 10 to 20 years old as an industry because it didn't really exist till and we could say a lot about that Merrill Lynch decision, whether people agree with it or not. But if you want to take a positive outlook, it did encourage the industry to start moving forward and start evolving some of these new things and it becoming popularized. So I think there's a lot of negatives to be found within it, but I mean, it is a turning point in the industry. So that's a kind of a good thing to
Yeah, but let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, the industry, the financial industry is very savvy and they are always looking for new avenues of revenue.
Mhm.
So, think about it. You had this band of folks that were, and they were a small group that were talking about just financial planning and charging a flat fee and not even taking commissions. And the bigger it took. So if that started in 1970, it didn't take hold to where the big guys like Merrill Lynch started wanting to aggressively get a piece of that until the mid 90s probably. And the financial industry is so big and so has so much money in it. That they have a strong lobbying arm, and so the lobbyers were out there and they knew what they had to go after. They wanted a piece of that pie because they saw that the term financial advisor was gaining ground. So you can see why they started lobbying for that. But like you said, it's a dual-edged sword. It did, I suppose, make things, or maybe it was just the environment, it started becoming more accessible to folks after Merrill Lynch got that decision. And but maybe it was just the winds of change coming and coming to a head, and the big guys saying we got to get a piece of that. So I think that's how that kind of evolved.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we talked about the second period, so we talked about the birth in 69 and then the growing up of the industry. And now we're entering into the 2000s, kind of post Merrill Lynch rule. We have the 2000s, the 2010s, and then we're currently in the 2020s here. The industry has done, in my opinion, a lot of growing, a lot of changing in this period post 2000, post Y2K. Um, Again, how much of this did I really experience? This is kind of my lifetime. It's kind of poetic if you think about it, because this is really my lifetime now. We talked about being born in a similar era. I'm sort of born around this era here, and I can speak to my experience, but I'd be interested to hear a little bit more, Father, on this now 2000s, 2010s, and then maybe even just your entry into the industry. What
Mhm.
made you want to enter it? What you were
Mhm.
seeing, and how that's evolved over the last quarter of a century.
Sure. Yeah. After the year 2000, I specifically remember engaging. I think I was the rank of a captain at the time, and I had a major who was in the reserves, and he was studying to become a physician, but he was more savvy, of investing and so forth. And his advice to me was, because the TSP, thrift savings plan was very, very early those days. I mean, I don't think I had even actually heard about it. And what I did hear about it, like you didn't get any matching. You could, if you really wanted to invest, you might be able to do better on the market, So we were not educated very, very well on it. So I was not engaging in the TSP at all. And this gentleman, this major, he's pretty savvy. And like his advice to me was, you need to go and open up a Roth IRA. So that must have been about 2003, 2004. So that probably was the first time that I was engaged by somebody with a pretty good idea for myself in that day and age. And Roth IRAs were accessible, I'd say, back in that day. And you would find somebody in one of the retail wirehouses, whether it be Edward Jones or something like that, and they would be able to help you to establish and I did do that. I started a Roth IRA, and then shortly after that, for educational purposes, having two children, I did have the GI Bill, which I had already transferred, the post 9/11. But I came up with the strategy of using that for one child and then just saving for the next child, which would be you. So I did start a 529 also, once I got engaged with an investment firm, and started the Roth IRA and started talking about, well, I also want to, I want to save for education. Then I started investing in a 529. So that was sort of my experience in the 2000 to 2010 timeframe.
Okay, I'm gonna call this era the post 2000 era. I'm gonna call it the E-Trade baby era.
Yeah.
This sounds like to me when and I guess that's my experience growing up was the fund commercials because I wasn't really investing much yet for the 2000s and the 2010s. So I'm gonna call it the E-Trade baby era because this sounds like when people actually sounds like they started really paying attention. It really became important to people. Maybe in the 80s and 90s, people started paying attention, but it didn't become important. People didn't realize that they need to start doing some kind of planning, even if it's on their own, until the 2000s, the 2010s, and now we are where we are today. So I think did you have something else to
Yeah,
add?
and remember that pensions overall in the United States were going away,
Right.
basically going away. And we didn't touch on 401ks were becoming more and more popular. And then I think that was late 90s-ish into the 2000s. After that dot-com bubble and IBM and Microsoft and all those started becoming large companies, I think that's probably where the 401ks started to really come in, and pensions started going away. Companies didn't want to be bogged down with the of straddled with pensions, and would prefer to give a good benefit while they're working, and build up your own retirement. So the 401ks started coming in. But you mentioned the E-Trade baby, and I can't say for certain, but my memory, it could be wrong. I I'll bet you could point it back to a Super Bowl in the 2000s where that commercial was first, and it was funny. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. Well, it shows a shift of, like we talked about, the large companies, like you mentioned, really starting to try to move into some of these spaces and evolve with the time, especially with the dot-com bubble and technology expanding. So let's talk about something I'm very passionate about, where the industry is at today. Okay. I have a couple factoids for you, and I think they both serve to help identify the demographics of where the industry's at today because it's still not in a place that frankly I'm super happy with. I think it has much more evolving to do, and we're trying to be the part of that leading front, and there's a lot of people on that front but not nearly enough. So here's a couple factoids. The average age of a US financial advising advisor according to JD Power is your age, father, 56 years old, which for any industry is pretty, I mean, that's pretty old. So it's a very top heavy industry. There's not enough young people coming into it. And I think it's starting to shift a little bit.
Mhm.
Universities are starting to have wealth management degrees and financial planning degrees. And that's really taking a really good turn. So hopefully those demographics will continue to evolve. And then who knows with AI and things, how we might get new tools and that assist advisors and how that will continue to evolve. My other factoid, and this comes from a study done by Human Investing, just looking at uh, both the BLS data as well as FINRA registrations, is that roughly 95%, actually slightly over 95%, but roughly 95% of people that call themselves financial advisors are registered either as a broker and or an insurance agent, which I think is a very important distinction. So meaning less than 5% of financial advisors are the way that we are, where you don't sell products, you just do the financial planning, right? The mission that was set out in 1969 of the financial planning, and they still did sell things back then because that's really the only way you could make money. People were not just paying for planning really, but the goal, the mission, is only 5% of the current industry. So
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
this is, I think when people look at the industry and they might have certain connotations around what it is and how it works, I think those two numbers really serve a really big part of it. The top heavy nature of it age wise, and then the fact that 95% is, I would argue, not what people are looking for. A lot of people are looking for those fiduciary only financial advisors, that less than 5% of the industry.
Yeah, and we could be in on the precipice of those big guys, the large wirehouses, taking a look at that model and wanting a piece of it, because I've seen evidence of that starting to happen where they want to spin off a part of them that does pure fiduciary part. But we'll see if that comes about or not, because that's a tough way for our wirehouse to make money that way. So, but 5% of us are out there doing a fiduciary. And when we say fiduciary, we're talking about at all times acting in the best interest of the client over yourself. And you can see how there's sort of a conflict there if you're trying to be a fiduciary, putting the client above yourself at all times, but you also can spin your head around and be a salesman and get a commission off of a product. So that's kind of what we talk about. And it also is I'd say the most compelling reason, honestly, when you invited me into this business with you to get into it, uh, and, to treat veterans and military with a sort of a model that has the integrity that they've come to expect and really that they deserve, so that, instead of pushing any products, commissions, feeling the weight of, in order to get paid, I need them to agree to buy this product, so take that mind frame and flip it over and say, I just want to do the best financial planning. There's all kinds of products out there. I want to find the best ones that are best suited for them and are in their best interest, regardless of what it does for me or anybody else. So, that was very compelling when we did that. And as well as I do, we both came in the industry together under one of the large wirehouses, and we were not under that model. So we got a really good look at sort of, and I'll say this, not to be derogatory, but the underbelly of the financial industry and see what's out there. And you and I have had many discussions about, the flippant way that in some really just public and large forums, that there were jokes put out there, and the whole audience would react to it and laugh to it, where you and I would look at each other and say, "What are they? What kind of human beings are these?" Because they were like talking about, well, I made this phone call and, well, yeah, I did tell, it wasn't really the truth that I was telling, but it got them into the meeting, and it's like, so my stomach was turning at that all along, and you and I. We stayed in that model for a short while before we realized that we need to jump ship and go to this RIA, registered investment advisor, start our own company so that we could do planning the way that we want. So I don't know if that furthered our discussion, but I'll hand it over to you to see what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, no, and I would concur in a lot of that. And I think it was good that we spent some time in the underbelly of the beast and got to see how a lot of the industry works. And it's hard to demonize it because I'm sure there's people that are perfectly fine with the industry being that. It's just not what we would want, and it's not what we would want to see. It's not what we would want to be clients of. It's not what we would want to be advisors of. So we're much happier now. I think I can speak for both of us that we're in the model that we are, where we can just do the financial planning. We don't have to have these conflict. You can't avoid conflicts of interest entirely, but we can eliminate as many as we can. We don't need to also be selling products for specific companies and getting commissions on those and only getting paid if we sell this specific kind of product to someone. We can just focus on serving the client in the best way that we can. That's the way that I hope the industry continues to move. I hope that people continue to see the value in that, and I think they do. And we keep hearing it over and over when people find us, and I'm sure when they find other firms that are like us, they go, where have you guys been for the last 10, 20 years of my life? They haven't been able to find it. And it really, it's sad to me that a lot of people will have a connotation or a thought in their mind of a financial advisor, and they'll think of a broker or they'll think of an insurance agent.
Mhm.
And that's sad to me because I think that probably dissuades people from trying to pursue a financial advisor. But there's a lot of good resources out there that people can look at to try to find one of and I don't like using the term, but the term a lot of times is fee only.
Mhm.
Fee only meaning that they don't take commissions, so they only take a fee from their clients. So there's no but there's a lot of good search engines, a lot of good places people can go to find a fee only advisor. Maybe in the description of this video, we can leave some of the links
Mhm.
to the NAPFA search, the National Associations of I think it's fee only planning, something like that. The XYPN has a search where you can search for fee only financial advisors. The CFP, you can search for CFPs, but I mean, we can maybe make a quick comment and then wrap up on the CFP as
Mhm.
well, because
Yeah.
it seems like the CFP is sort of taking over the industry as the leading proof positive that someone's a good advisor or not a good advisor.
Hmm.
I'll throw a couple factoids and then get your thoughts on it, but they just passed 100,000. So there's 100,000, a little over 100,000 CFP professionals, certified financial planner professionals. My rant or gripe always with the CFP has been that it's not a professional designation. It's a trademark that people can use, done by a private organization, which I don't mind. I actually kind of like that it's
Hmm.
privatized. I'm not a big fan that they use the word certified. And it kind of like they almost made it really reflective of a CPA, maybe a certified public accountant, or like a JD or something like that that's done through the states and is an actual designation. Um, and we've had gripes in the past about, they're not fee only, they're not fiduciary only. They do allow for insurance agents and brokers to also get the CFP. So it's kind of similar to that financial advisor term
Hmm.
in that. I would probably say that it does sway a little bit more towards the fee only fiduciary financial advisors than maybe just the term financial advisor in itself. But I'll get your thoughts, Father, on what you think about the CFP
Yeah.
trademark.
Yeah. I'll talk about that, but in context to your former factoid about most advisors, majority are age 56. Let's just go back to that. What that means is that they typically have come from that former world that we just talked about, right? So they came in as an insurance agent, broker dealer agent, so forth, and they still use that model. But in the meantime, they were able to go and get the CFP designation, and you can think of it how it is. On face value, CFP, the training is very good. You learn good things. You learn a lot about financial planning, but the designation is a double-edged sword because it both gives you credibility, but it also gives you a place to hide in some regard to say, I'm both a fiduciary and a salesman, and I'll be a fiduciary when I need to be, but I am able to turn my hat around and sell you commission products. And it's very nuanced, and that's what our industry is. It's very nuanced. People use that nuance, and whether some of them, obviously there must be a scale of them. Some of them outrightly use it. Others take it to heart. So take the CFP designation what you will. It does affirm that individual has gone under some pretty intense training, pretty intense testing. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean that they're not a salesman at all. So that's the double-edged sword of CFPs. So if you just go out and search for CFPs, you could have such a wide range. You could have somebody, because although they put a moral element to calling yourself a CFP and holding on to that trademark, I think the oversight of that is very weak, if I'm to criticize it. And so once you have that designation, it's very easy to hold on to it and use it if you're of that mind, use it to say, I have this credibility, and it's sort of, you could have a connotation of it brings along a moral responsibility with it. But that moral responsibility to me, if I had my ideal world, that moral responsibility to me would mean I'm fee only and I'm not selling you commission products. But that's not the way the industry's gone. That's not how the CFP has gone. Um, so one of the things why we started this channel was to educate people so that they understand the background of it, and they can discriminate financial advisors based on some other things. CFP designation is one thing, but you still could have a wide range of what that professional's like, right?
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. And we should say this with the caveat that we finally have bitten the bullet and taken our classes to get the certification, and eventually next year we'll take the exam and become CFPs. But maybe a good direction to point people in. Again, I mentioned NAPFA earlier, which is I had to look it up, the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors, and that is fee only. So to be a member in NAPFA, an advisor must have their CFP and then also be fee only. So maybe we'll link down the NAPFA search function below. That's not a bad place to start. Or people can always reach out to our firm as well if they want to speak to fee only financial advisors. Um, I think we've covered the history pretty well. Maybe we'll each give our thoughts on the hope and the future of the industry, and then we'll wrap up
Mhm.
for this video. Maybe we can also quickly describe our hopes for future videos and the type of content that we want to create and
Mhm.
cover. I would say that my hope for the future of the industry is that I think obviously it keeps trending towards that fee only. I wouldn't mind if, I'm not a big fan of regulation preventing things. I just like transparency is the biggest thing I
Mhm.
think can come from legislation. And so more clarity and transparency on the terms that people use, I think would do the industry a lot of good. Because I don't think it's bad to be an insurance agent or a broker. I think they certainly have their place and they are needed for the industry to function.
Mhm.
But I think people should know what they're dealing with without having 15 caveats to the title that someone has. So creating separate terms for what these are that are recognized and official and used consistently, I think would do the industry a lot of good. That's sort of my
Yeah.
biggest hope.
Yeah.
And then I have little subtle hopes about AI and what that can do for the industry. But Father, give us some of your hope and what you hope the future holds for the financial planning industry.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on the transparency. I wish that we could get to some terminology that really meant things, that you knew that it meant things, where I kind of just laid out a picture of, you can have a wide range of skill sets and really moral attitudes underneath one banner. I think the best thing they could do is to make it more transparent and have a term mean something. I have my doubts about that because like we said, the financial industry has a lot of money. They have a lot of lobbyists. So that's just the reality in the United States. So again, that's the need for a program like ours, and the reason that we want to talk about these things open and honestly with folks so that they can hear a discussion from two people in the industry that have seen the underbelly. My hopes going forward, I do hope that we'll say 5% mark of fee only starts to tick up. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but the large wirehouses, the 95% of them are so large out there and they're expanding so quickly. It's going to be hard for those fee onlys to expand as quickly as them. So I'm a little worried that percentage is going to go down. But who will, time will tell. So, but my hope for the industry is at least to get, Congress or something in place so that the terms mean a little bit more for the, the regular retail individual out there who really starts to need and want financial planning.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that we have just demonstrated for the people that will watch this the different natures of my optimism and maybe a little bit more of your pessimism at times. I
Mhm.
think we tend to be opposites in that aspect, but I think it provides a very unique and good overview of things. And that's one of the reasons we're able to kind of source through things so well. Let's end this recording with just an overview for the channel one more time and the type of content that we hope to produce. I was very adamant when we started this that I didn't want to create the same slop that every other, financial services company seems to be creating, where they create this, fast-paced, short cut up, try to grab your eye attention of semi-useful things that are just out of context. We're not going to be making videos that's filmed and shot in a weird eye-catching way of here's how to do a Roth conversion. That's just not what we want to do. What
Right.
we want to do is the long form conversations, deep conversations that we think are valuable on a little bit deeper of topics. I mean, we will focus a lot of things on active duty veterans, federal employees, government contractors, but we'll go outside of that as well and we'll expand outside of that. And then, I think a lot of the discussions will be on very tough topics, not how do you do a Roth conversion,
Mhm.
but maybe what's the right philosophy when it comes to investing? What are the different ones? Maybe explaining more history, maybe, I would really like to do and find things that we disagree on and have those disagreements public on the channel and work through things and play devil's advocate. And I think that's more so of what this channel is going to offer than maybe compared to some other ones. But Father, I'll give you the final word,
Mhm.
on what your hopes are for the channel, and then we'll go ahead and end there for today.
Yeah, no, I'm on board 100%. We would have conversations as we were starting up our company, and they were such good, deep conversations about financial planning and philosophies that I wish that other people could be exposed to it. And this is a venue to do that. And you know the typical videos that you're referring to is almost like they're just like to me seem like marketing schemes and sales jobs. And we've always said we're not salesmen. We want to do financial planning, and we take an educational approach. So we wanted to do the same thing with this video: is take an educational approach to it to inform people so that they can make wiser decisions and get the long form discussion. I think a lot more truth and context comes out in that form rather than trying to do a sales video where you're trying to force that fear of missing out on something. Come and talk to us because we'll help you out. That's not what we're about. We want to come from a sincere area, and especially I would also say just from my military background and from the folks we mainly serve, as veterans and military, um, you know, uh, getting better access to good information so that they can make wise choices. So if we accomplish some of that and have some good conversations, I'd be happy with this channel.
All right. Well, I think that's a good wrap for this video. Let's try to plan to put out a video a few times a month at least, maybe on the once a week or so, and then we look forward to putting out some more stuff in the future.
Great. That sounds fun to me, and we'll see everybody out there next time.